The rain hit the windows of the penthouse office 30 floors above Busan harbor, and Kang Joon-Ho was laughing. That was the first wrong thing. People who knew him would tell you Kang Joon-Ho did not laugh in business meetings. He listened. He calculated. He let silence do the threatening for him. But on this particular evening, with 3 nervous executives seated across from his obsidian desk, he let out a short, genuine laugh at something one of them said, and then, mid-laugh, he stopped. His mouth was still open. His eyes had gone somewhere else entirely. Behind the executives, near the door, a woman in a plain gray uniform had just set down a tray of tea. She hadn't spoken. She hadn't even looked at him directly. She'd simply murmured 4 words to the junior assistant beside her, words not meant for Joon-Ho at all, words about needing to find a missing ledger before her shift ended. "I just need to find it." That was all she said. 5 ordinary words in a quiet voice. And Kang Joon-Ho, the man 3 rival syndicates had tried and failed to kill, sat frozen in his $3 million chair like a man who had seen a ghost. The executives exchanged glances. One of them cleared his throat. "Mr. Kang, should we continue?" He didn't answer. He was staring at the maid's hands, the way she folded the towel over the tray handle, precise, practiced, the same exact fold a girl had used 12 years ago to fold a chest towel over a board so the pieces wouldn't scatter on a moving train. It couldn't be her. It absolutely could not be her. And yet his entire chest had gone tight, like something inside him recognized her bones before his mind caught up. Who was this man, and why did a single ordinary sentence from a maid he had never officially met turn the most feared crime lord in Busan into a stone statue at his own desk? To understand that frozen second, you have to go back. Not far, just far enough to see the shape of the trap closing. 3 days earlier, in a different wing of that same sprawling estate, a woman named Bose had been scrubbing a windowsill on the 2nd floor when she heard her own name spoken by strangers who didn't know she was listening. "The new girl," one of the senior housekeepers said. "Quiet thing. Doesn't talk about her past. You ever notice she has an accent under the accent? Like she's hiding one language behind another." "Not our business," the other replied. "As long as she works." Bose had stood very still on the other side of the wall, a cloth in her hand, her heart doing something strange and small. An accent under the accent. She didn't know why those words landed like a slap. She didn't know much, these days, about why anything landed the way it did. There were entire years of her life that lived behind a locked door in her mind, and she had stopped trying to force that door open months ago, because every time she tried, the headache that followed felt like punishment. She knew her name. She knew she was 27. She knew she had woken up in a hospital bed 2 years ago with stitches above her eyebrow and a doctor telling her, gently, that some memory loss after trauma was normal, that it might return, that it might not. She knew she had no family who came looking. She knew that frightened her more than anything else. What she did not know, what she could not have known, scrubbing that windowsill with her quiet hands, was that the very mansion she worked in belonged to a man who had spent 12 years searching for a girl who looked almost exactly like her. Before we go further into this, quick question for you watching right now. Where in the world are you joining us from today? Drop your country or city down in the comments. We always love seeing just how far these stories reach. And if you haven't already, go ahead and tap that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Okay, back to Bose. Bose had arrived in Korea 18 months earlier with nothing but a small bag, a passport under a name that wasn't entirely hers, and an emptiness where her past should have been. She had taken the maid position at the Kang estate because the agency that placed her didn't ask many questions, and because something about the size of the property, its anonymity, its silence, felt safer than anywhere smaller. She liked the gardens best. She liked the hour before dawn when the koi pond was still and nobody needed anything from her. She liked that nobody here knew her, because for the first time since the accident, not being known felt like peace instead of danger. She had seen Kang Joon-Ho exactly 4 times since she started. Always from a distance. Always surrounded by men in dark suits who moved like they were guarding something more valuable than money. The other staff spoke about him in hushed, careful tones. Don't look him in the eye too long, don't speak unless spoken to, don't ever be late with his evening tea. She had never once thought he was looking back at her. Not until the night of the tray. It happened almost by accident. The senior maid assigned to serve the executives had taken ill that evening, and Bose, being nearby and competent, had been told to step in for 15 minutes. 15 minutes. That was all it was supposed to be. She had walked into that office with her tray, set it down exactly the way she'd been trained, and murmured her small comment to the junior assistant beside her about the missing ledger, a comment that had nothing to do with Kang Joon-Ho at all. And then she felt it. The silence. The specific, heavy silence of a room where one person has stopped breathing normally. She looked up. Kang Joon-Ho was staring at her the way a man stares at something he has been told 1,000 times does not exist, and is now seeing with his own eyes anyway. "Sir," one of the executives said again, uncertain. Joon-Ho rose from his chair so fast the leather creaked. "Leave," he said. His voice had a strange crack in it, something none of those men had ever heard from him. "All of you." No. The executives didn't argue. Men who had built empires on knowing when to leave a room left that room in under 10 seconds. Bose stood frozen by the tray, unsure if she was included in the order, unsure if she'd done something wrong, her pulse climbing for reasons she couldn't name. "You too," he said to the junior assistant. "Not her." The assistant fled. And then it was only the two of them, the rain against the glass, and the low electric hum of a city that had no idea what was about to happen 30 floors below it. Joon-Ho came around the desk slowly, like a man approaching something fragile that might shatter if he moved too fast. Up close, Bose could see his hands were not steady. The most feared man in Busan had hands that were not steady, and it terrified her more than anything else could have. "Say that again," he said quietly. "What you said. Just now." Bose's mouth went dry. I don't understand, sir. I only said I needed to find the ledger." "Not those words." His jaw tightened, like he was holding something back by force. "Say your name." "Bose," she said, confused. "Bose. Adeyemi." The name left her mouth, and something inside his chest cracked open like ice giving way on a frozen river. He took a step back, one hand pressing flat against his own sternum as if to hold himself together. "It can't be," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "You're supposed to be. You disappeared. 12 years. 12 years, and you're standing in my office serving tea." Bose's heart was hammering now, fear and confusion tangled into something close to panic. "Sir, I think you have me confused with. Do you remember a chessboard?" His voice cracked on the question, raw in a way that didn't belong to a syndicate king. "A wooden one. Cracked on one corner. Do you remember a rainy night and a promise you made a boy who had nothing?" The world tilted under Bose's feet. She didn't understand why, but something in her chest answered before her mind could stop it. A flicker, faint as a candle in wind, of wooden pieces sliding across a board, of laughter that didn't belong to this room, of a boy's voice saying "I promise." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice shook on every word, and they both heard the lie sitting on top of the truth she didn't have access to. Joon-Ho closed the distance between them in 2 steps. He didn't touch her. He didn't dare. He simply stood close enough that she could see his eyes were wet, glassy, the eyes of a man 12 years deep into a search he'd never told anyone he was still running. "You don't remember me," he said. It wasn't a question anymore. It was a devastation settling into fact. "You really don't remember." Bose took a step back, her hands trembling around the now empty tray. "Please, sir, I need to return to my duties." "Your father," he said, and the words stopped her completely, "was the only man who ever looked at me like I was worth saving. And I spent 12 years trying to keep a promise I made to his daughter. A promise that I would find her if she ever got lost." Tears she didn't understand rose unbidden in Bose's eyes. "My father is dead," she said quietly. "I don't know how you know that. I don't know how you know anything about me. I don't even know everything about myself." "I know," Joon-Ho said, and for the first time his voice broke completely. "I know, because I've spent 12 years finding out exactly what was done to him. And to you." The rain kept falling outside the glass, indifferent to the two people standing in the wreckage of a memory only one of them could still access. "What do you mean?" Bose whispered. "What was done to him?" Joon-Ho looked at her for a long moment, weighing every consequence of the next sentence before he let it leave his mouth. "Your father didn't die in an accident," he said. "And neither did you almost die in one. Someone wanted both of you gone, Bose. And I think they're not finished. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the narrow staff quarters with the lights off, staring at a ceiling she'd memorized over 18 months of insomnia, and she replayed his words over and over until they lost their shape and became just sounds. Your father didn't die in an accident. They're not finished. It would have been easy to dismiss him as a madman, except for one detail that kept circling back through her chest like a blade she couldn't put down. He had known her real name. Not the one on her papers. Not the alias the placement agency had filed for her. Her real name, the one buried under a different identity she'd built specifically so no one could ever find her. How does a syndicate boss in Busan know the real name of a maid who scrubs his windowsills? The next morning, she was summoned, not by a note slipped under her door, but by Joon-Ho himself, standing in the staff hallway at 6 a.m. in a dark coat, looking like he hadn't slept either. "Walk with me," he said. She almost refused. Every instinct she'd built over the past 2 years told her to refuse, to keep her head down, to disappear the way she'd disappeared once before. But there was something in his face, something that looked less like a powerful man giving an order and more like a man asking, quietly, desperately, to be believed. She walked with him. He took her to a private garden behind the east wing, away from staff, away from cameras, away from the men who guarded every other inch of the property. There was a stone bench beneath a maple tree, and on it sat an old wooden box. "Open it," he said. Her hands shook as she lifted the lid. Inside was a chessboard. Old. Worn smooth at the edges. Cracked at one corner, exactly as he'd described it the night before. "This was your father's," Joon-Ho said. "He gave it to me the year I turned 18. Told me a king who only knows war will lose to a king who knows patience. I didn't understand it then. I understand it now." Bose ran her fingers across the cracked wood, and something deep in her chest stirred, not a full memory, just a sensation, like déjà vu with teeth. "I don't remember this," she said. "I want to. I can feel that I should. But I don't." "You will," Joon-Ho said, with a certainty that startled her. "Memory like that doesn't disappear. It hides. And I'm going to help you find it, the same way I promised your father I'd help find you if you ever got lost." "You keep saying that," Bose said, frustration breaking through the fear now. "A promise. To my father. About me. I don't even know who you are to him, or who he was to you, or why any of this matters to a man who runs—" She stopped herself, but the unspoken word hung in the air anyway. "A syndicate." Joon-Ho's expression didn't flinch. "Say it," he said. "You're not wrong to think it." "Yes. I run an organization that most of this country fears. I've done things I'm not proud of. But before I was any of that, I was a homeless 17-year-old who used to steal bread near the harbor, and your father was the only person in this entire country who looked at me and saw something other than a thief." He sat down on the bench, suddenly looking less like a king and more like the boy he was describing. "He found me sleeping under a loading dock during a storm," Joon-Ho continued, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. "He didn't call security. He didn't walk past. He gave me his coat and asked me my name. The next day he came back with a job offer and a warning that he expected results, not gratitude. I worked for him for 3 years before he trusted me with anything that mattered. And during those years, I met you." Bose felt her pulse stutter. "Me. You were maybe 9. Loud. Stubborn. You used to challenge me to chess every time your father brought you to the office, and you hated losing more than you hated anything else in the world." A faint, painful smile crossed his face. "You never once let me win out of pity. You'd have been insulted by it." For one fragile second, something flickered behind Bose's eyes, a glimpse, gone before she could grab it, of a smaller version of herself slamming a chess piece down on a board and declaring victory with absolute, joyful arrogance. "I felt that," she whispered, startled. "Just now. I felt something." "That's a start," Joon-Ho said, and the relief in his voice was almost unbearable to witness. "That's more than I've had in 12 years. But peace, even fragile peace, never lasts long in a story like this." 3 floors above the garden, behind tinted glass, a man named Choi Min-suk watched the two of them through a pair of binoculars with an expression curling slowly from curiosity into something far more dangerous. Min-suk had come to the estate that morning under the pretense of discussing a shipping contract with Joon-Ho's company, a contract his father, Choi Sung-tae, desperately needed signed. But contracts had become the least interesting thing in the building the moment he spotted the quiet maid who served his coffee the week before, the one with the eyes that didn't flinch when he looked at her too long, unlike every other woman who worked for men like him. He had asked one of the housekeepers about her in passing. Just her name. Just where she'd come from. The housekeeper, eager to please a Choi, had told him more than she should have, that the girl barely spoke about her past, that her papers looked recently issued, that there was something unplaceable about her that made the staff whisper. Min-suk didn't care about whispers. He cared about wanting something he hadn't been given yet, and the look on Kang Joon-Ho's face right now, protective, possessive, almost reverent, only sharpened that want into something obsessive. Interesting, Min-suk murmured to himself, lowering the binoculars slowly. The untouchable Kang Joon-Ho, touched after all. He smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Let's see how untouchable you really are," he said to the glass, "when I take the one thing you clearly can't stand to lose." By evening, Bose had returned to her duties as if nothing had happened, though everything inside her had shifted on its axis. She moved through the mansion's long marble corridors with her cart of linens, her mind replaying fragments, a chessboard, a child's laughter that might have been her own, a man's voice promising something across 12 lost years. She didn't notice Min-suk until he was already blocking the hallway in front of her. "You're the new girl," he said, smiling in a way that made the hair on her arms rise instantly. "Bose, is it?" "I have work to finish, sir," she said carefully, stepping to the side. He stepped with her, mirroring the movement, closing the gap she'd just opened. "I saw you in the garden this morning. With Kang Joon-Ho." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "You must be very special to him. He doesn't usually walk anyone through that garden. Not even his own men. I really need to get back to—" "What is it about you?" Min-suk interrupted, voice dropping lower. "That makes the most feared man in this city look like a lovesick fool?" Bose's chest tightened with a fear that had nothing to do with confusion now and everything to do with instinct, the oldest and most reliable kind. "I don't know what you mean, sir. Please, let me pass." He reached out, not violently, but with a slow, deliberate confidence that was somehow worse, his fingers grazing the edge of her sleeve. "I think you do know exactly what I mean. And I think a girl as interesting as you shouldn't be wasting her time scrubbing floors for a man who'll never actually claim her." "Let go of my sleeve," Bose said, her voice low and even despite the trembling underneath it. For a moment, Min-suk's eyes flickered with something darker, irritation at being refused, the particular fury of a man who had never once in his life heard the word no and meant to respect it. And then, from the far end of the corridor, a voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. "Min-suk." Joon-Ho stood at the end of the hallway, utterly still, his expression unreadable in the low light, and somehow that stillness was more frightening than any shout could have been. Min-suk released her sleeve immediately, stepping back with the practiced ease of a man used to performing innocence. "Joon-Ho, I was just having a conversation with one of your staff." "She's not staff," Joon-Ho said, walking toward them slowly, each footstep landing with the weight of a verdict. "Not to me." "Is that so?" Min-suk's smile thinned, calculating now, recalculating the value of what he'd just stumbled onto. "Then perhaps you should tell her that. Because right now, she just looks like a maid standing alone in a hallway, completely unprotected." The air between the two men went taut, charged, the kind of silence that precedes either violence or something far more strategic. Bose stood frozen between them, suddenly aware that she had become the fault line in a fracture that had clearly existed long before she'd arrived. "You should leave," Joon-Ho said quietly. "Now, while I'm still being polite about it." Min-suk laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Polite. That's a new look for you." He glanced once more at Bose, lingering, deliberate, a promise of his own hidden in that look, the dangerous kind, the kind that doesn't disappear just because someone tells it to leave a hallway. "We'll talk again, Bose. I'm sure of it." He walked away unhurried, like a man who had simply postponed a meal rather than been denied one. The moment he was gone, the air seemed to thin and become breathable again. Bose's knees nearly gave out, the adrenaline draining from her body all at once, and Joon-Ho was at her side before she even registered the movement, his hands hovering near her shoulders, not quite touching, as if asking permission with his proximity alone. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice low, urgent. "No," she said, though her voice shook. "No, I'm fine. She pressed a hand to her chest. "Who was that man?" "Choi Min-suk," Joon-ho said, the name leaving his mouth like something bitter. "Son of Choi Sung-tae. A man whose family has wanted things they had no right to want for far longer than you've been alive." Bose looked up at him, searching his face for the lie she half expected, the lie that always seemed to live somewhere in men with that much power. She didn't find one. What she found instead was something rawer, fear, real fear, sitting behind his eyes for the first time since she'd met him. "You're afraid," she said quietly, surprised by her own observation. "I didn't think a man like you could be afraid of anything." "I'm not afraid for myself," Joon-ho said, his voice dropping into something almost unbearably honest. "I lost you once, Bose, to people I couldn't protect you from in time. I am not losing you again." The words hit her chest like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward into places she didn't have language for yet. She didn't remember him. Not really. Not in the way he remembered her. But something underneath the locked door of her mind responded to him anyway, some old recognition that bypassed memory entirely and went straight for instinct. "I don't understand any of this," she whispered. 12 years. A promise. My father. None of it makes sense to me yet." "It will," Joon-ho said. "I'll make sure of it. But first," his jaw tightened, the Syndicate King resurfacing beneath the boy who'd once slept under a loading dock, "I need to make sure Min-suk understands exactly what happens to men who look at you the way he just did." Bose felt a chill at the certainty in his voice, the absolute lack of hesitation. Whatever was coming next, she understood instinctively that the quiet, careful world she'd built for herself over the past 18 months was already gone, dissolved the moment she'd whispered 5 ordinary words over a tea tray. Somewhere above them, behind tinted glass, Choi Min-suk was already making a phone call to his father, describing a maid worth destroying an empire for, not realizing he had just described the one mistake that would eventually destroy his own. And somewhere deeper still, in a locked drawer inside a private vault 3 floors beneath the mansion, sat a manila folder Joon-ho had never shown anyone. 12 years of evidence, surveillance photos, financial records, and one final unconfirmed theory about exactly who had ordered the accident that took Emmanuel Adeyemi's life and erased his daughter's memory along with it. The storm outside the windows had not stopped. If anything, it was only getting started. The folder sat untouched in the vault for exactly 3 more hours before Joon-ho decided that secrecy had finally outlived its usefulness. He stood in front of it long after midnight, the mansion quiet above him, listening to nothing but the low hum of the climate control system and the sound of his own heartbeat in his ears. 12 years he had kept this folder sealed. 12 years of evidence collected one careful piece at a time, hidden from his own organization, hidden from anyone who might use it as leverage, hidden even from himself on the nights when looking at it felt like reopening a wound that refused to heal properly. He lifted it now and carried it upstairs, past sleeping guards, past the silent portraits of his predecessors lining the east corridor, until he reached the door of the small guest room where Bose had been moved that evening, closer to the main house, closer to him, under protection that no one was permitted to question. He didn't knock right away. He stood outside her door the way a man stands outside a confession booth, gathering the courage to say something that could either heal 12 years of grief or shatter it completely. When he finally knocked, she opened the door already dressed, already awake, as if some part of her had been expecting him. "You couldn't sleep either," she said quietly. "No," he admitted. "I don't think I've slept properly since I saw your face in that office 3 days ago." He held out the folder. "What is this?" she asked, taking it carefully, as though she could already feel its weight meant more than paper. "Everything," Joon-ho said. "Everything I've spent 12 years trying to understand. I think it's time you saw it. All of it. Even the parts that will hurt." Bose sat on the edge of the bed and opened the folder beneath the soft lamplight, and Joon-ho watched her face as she absorbed page after page, surveillance photographs of her father's business associates, transaction records flagged in red ink, handwritten notes in a script that was clearly his own, cross-referencing names she half recognized with companies she'd never heard of. "This is about my father," she said slowly. "Your father uncovered something," Joon-ho said, sitting carefully on the chair across from her, close enough to see her hands trembling but far enough to give her room to breathe. "Something massive. International. He found a network moving billions of dollars through shell companies, laundering money that funded things I won't describe to you tonight, things that powerful men wanted buried forever. He came to me 11 years ago, the week before he died, and he told me he was close to exposing it." "Why would he tell you?" Bose asked. "You were what, 23? A grown man, but still." "Because by then I wasn't just a boy he'd rescued from a loading dock," Joon-Ho said. "I had built something of my own. An organization with reach he didn't have through legal channels. He needed someone who could move in the shadows the way the people threatening him moved in the shadows. He trusted me with pieces of the puzzle he couldn't trust to lawyers or police, because by then he already suspected some of those very lawyers and police were compromised." Bose's fingers stilled on a photograph. Her father, younger, standing beside a man she didn't recognize at first, until something in the structure of the man's face clicked into place. "This is Choi Sung-tae," she said slowly, the name tasting strange and dangerous on her tongue, though she had no memory of ever speaking it before. "Min-suk's father," Joon-Ho confirmed. "And the man your father believed was the architect of the entire operation." The room went very quiet. "He killed my father," Bose said. It wasn't quite a question, but it wasn't a statement either. It was the sound of a person testing a sentence to see if her body could survive saying it out loud. "I believe so," Joon-Ho said carefully. "I haven't been able to prove it conclusively. That's the part that's kept me awake more nights than I can count. I have motive. I have financial records. I have a timeline that fits too perfectly to be coincidence. But I don't have the one piece that would make it undeniable in a court, or even in the underworld, where proof matters just as much as it does anywhere else." "And the accident," Bose said quietly. "My accident." Joon-Ho's jaw tightened, the muscle working beneath his skin like he was physically restraining something violent that wanted to surface. "The same week your father died, you were involved in a car accident that the official report called mechanical failure. I had the wreckage examined privately, years later, by an engineer I trust completely. The brake lines weren't worn through by age. They were cut." Bose felt the air leave her lungs slowly, like a tide pulling back from shore. "Someone tried to kill me," she whispered. "Someone succeeded in killing your father," Joon-Ho said, "and failed to kill you, but succeeded in erasing enough of your memory that you couldn't tell anyone what you knew. I believe that was always the secondary goal. If you lived but couldn't remember what your father told you in his final weeks, you stopped being a threat. You became invisible. Which is, I think, exactly what they wanted." Bose sat in silence for a long moment, the folder heavy in her lap, 12 years of someone else's careful, obsessive devotion laid bare in front of her. "Why didn't you ever find me sooner?" she asked finally, and there was no accusation in it, only the exhausted ache of someone trying to understand a decade of absence. "If you knew all this, if you cared this much, why 12 years? Joon-Ho looked down at his hands, and for the first time since she'd met him, the most feared man in Busan looked genuinely ashamed. "Because I looked for you in the wrong places," he admitted. "I assumed whoever erased your memory would keep you somewhere they controlled. I spent years chasing leads through the very network your father exposed, assuming you were a hostage, or worse. I never imagined you would do exactly what I would have done in your position, disappear so completely, so quietly, that even the people hunting you couldn't find you. You hid better than I ever thought to look." "I didn't hide on purpose," Bose said. "I didn't even know what I was hiding from. I just knew I was afraid, and I didn't trust anyone, and somehow Korea felt far enough away from whatever I couldn't remember that I could finally breathe." "And then you ended up in my house," Joon-Ho said, something almost disbelieving in his voice, like he still hadn't fully accepted the coincidence. "After 12 years of searching every corner of this continent for you, you walked into my office carrying a tea tray." "Maybe it wasn't coincidence," Bose said quietly. "Maybe some part of me remembered, even if I didn't know it. Maybe I was looking for you too, without knowing your name." Something in Joon-Ho's chest cracked open at that, vulnerable and raw, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all, the silence between them filled with 12 years of grief finally finding somewhere safe to land. But grief and safety are fragile things, and somewhere across the city, in a penthouse far less burdened by conscience, Choi Sung-tae was finishing a phone call with his son that would set the next stage of the storm into motion. "You're certain Kang Joon-Ho is protective of this girl," Sung-tae said, swirling a glass of dark liquor in his hand, his voice calm in the way that powerful men's voices become calm right before they decide to destroy something. "More than protective," Min-suk said, pacing his own apartment, still smarting from the humiliation of being dismissed in that hallway. Obsessive. He looked ready to kill me for simply speaking to her. Interesting, Sung-tae murmured. Kang Joon-Ho has never been obsessive about anything in his life except revenge. If he's protecting a maid this fiercely, she isn't just a maid. What do you want me to do? Min-suk asked. Nothing for now, his father said. Watch her. Learn everything you can about where she came from, what she remembers, what she doesn't. And in the meantime, I'll make a few calls of my own. If Emmanuel Adeyemi's daughter has resurfaced after 12 years, I want to know exactly how much she remembers before Kang Joon-Ho decides to weaponize her against us. He set the glass down with quiet, deliberate finality. And if it turns out she remembers too much, he added, we'll simply have to make sure the accident finishes what it started. The next morning, Joon-Ho made a decision that would ripple through Busan's underworld for weeks. He called an emergency meeting of his organization's senior leadership, men who had built careers on never asking him personal questions, and informed them, without elaboration, that Choi Min-suk had crossed a line that would not be tolerated. Within hours, 3 of Min-suk's largest shipping contracts were quietly redirected to competitors. Within a day, 2 investors who had been preparing to fund his latest business venture withdrew without explanation. Within 2 days, a deal Min-suk had spent 6 months negotiating with a Japanese conglomerate collapsed entirely, the conglomerate's representatives suddenly unreachable. The underworld noticed immediately, the way it always notices when someone touches something protected by Kang Joon-Ho. Whispers moved through Busan's back channels like smoke through a closed room. Someone touched a woman under Kang's protection. Someone is about to lose everything. Min-suk, watching his carefully built empire begin to fracture in real time, called his father in a panic that bordered on desperate. He's destroying me, Min-suk said, his voice tight with fury and fear in equal measure. Over a maid. Over a single conversation in a hallway. He's sending a message, Sung-tae said calmly, though there was a new edge beneath his composure now, a recalculation happening in real time. Which tells me she matters to him far more than we initially understood. This changes things. How does it change things? Min-suk demanded. Because a man who reacts this strongly to protect someone, Sung-tae said slowly, is a man who can be controlled through her. If we can't destroy Kang Joon-Ho directly, perhaps we destroy the one thing he can't afford to lose. The line went quiet for a moment, and when Sung-tae spoke again, his voice had dropped into something colder, more clinical, the voice of a man who had ordered far worse things than what he was about to suggest. Find out exactly how much she remembers, he said. And in the meantime, I think it's time we reminded Kang Joon-Ho that even kings can be framed for crimes they didn't commit. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at the staff entrance of the Kang estate, addressed simply to Bose, with no return address and no signature. She opened it alone in her room that evening, expecting nothing more than ordinary mail, and found instead a slim stack of documents that made her blood run cold. Financial transfer records, dated 11 years earlier, showing payments from an account linked to Choi Sung-tae's company into an account that bore Kang Joon-Ho's name. The dates lined up, almost too perfectly, with the week of her father's death. A handwritten note clipped to the top of the documents read simply, "Ask him where he really was the week your father died." Bose read the documents 3 times, her hands growing colder with each pass, the careful trust she had begun building over the past several days curdling into something sharp and suspicious in her chest. She found Joon-Ho in his study an hour later, the documents clutched in her hand, her voice shaking with a fury she hadn't known she was capable of until that exact moment. "What is this?" she demanded, throwing the papers onto his desk. Joon-Ho looked down at them, and Bose watched, searching desperately for guilt, for panic, for anything that would confirm what the documents seemed to suggest. What she saw instead confused her even further, genuine, blindsided shock. "Where did you get these?" he asked quietly. "Someone sent them to me," Bose said. "Anonymously. They show payments from Choi Sung-tae's company into an account with your name on it. The same week my father died. Tell me that's a coincidence." "It's not a coincidence," Joon-Ho said, "because it's not real. Bose, I never received money from Choi Sung-tae. I would never have taken a single one from that man, especially not during the week your father was murdered." "That's exactly what someone in your position would say," Bose said, her voice rising. 12 years of grief she hadn't even known she was carrying suddenly finding a target. You've spent days telling me about a promise, about loyalty, about searching for me for 12 years, and now I find proof that you might have been paid to look the other way while my father died? It's not proof, Joon-Ho said, his own voice rising now, frustration and hurt bleeding into his composure for the first time since she'd met him. It's fabrication. Look at the account number, Bose. I can show you my actual financial records from that period. They don't match. Then why would someone fabricate something this specific? Bose shot back. Why target me, specifically, with something this detailed, unless there's a kernel of truth buried in it? Because someone wants you to stop trusting me, Joon-Ho said, his voice dropping, urgent now, desperate to be believed. Because the moment you stop trusting me, you stop being protected. Don't you see what's happening? Someone is trying to isolate you the same way they isolated your father before they killed him. But trust, once cracked, doesn't repair itself through logic alone, and Bose had spent 2 years learning the hard lesson that the people closest to you are sometimes the most dangerous. I need time, she said quietly, stepping back from him. I need to think. Alone. Bose. Please, she said, and something in her voice made him stop entirely, made him let her walk past him toward the door without reaching for her, without trying to physically stop the only person his entire search for the past 12 years had been about. She walked out of that study with the weight of 2 betrayals pressing on her chest, the one that may or may not have happened 11 years ago, and the one she felt happening right now, in real time, as the only person who claimed to know her past became, once again, a complete stranger. It took Joon-Ho exactly 2 days to trace the fabricated documents back to their source, working through contacts inside 3 different banks and one extremely nervous forensic accountant who owed him a favor he'd never had to call in before. The documents had been digitally altered, the account numbers cleverly disguised, the transfer dates manipulated using software sophisticated enough that only someone with serious resources could have produced them. Resources exactly like the ones controlled by Choi Sung-tae. When Joon-Ho finally confronted Bose again, 3 days after she'd walked away from him, he didn't come with words alone. He came with evidence, bank verification letters, an affidavit from the forensic accountant, a complete breakdown of exactly how the fabrication had been constructed and by whom. I know you have every reason not to trust anything I say right now, he told her, standing in the doorway of her room, refusing to step inside until she gave him permission. So I'm not asking you to trust my words. I'm asking you to look at the proof yourself. Bose read through everything slowly, methodically. The same careful suspicion she'd applied to the original fabricated documents now turned toward verifying their falseness instead. By the time she reached the final page, something in her chest had loosened, just slightly, the iron grip of betrayal easing into something closer to cautious relief. Choi Sung-tae did this, she said quietly, to isolate you from the one person actively trying to find out the truth about your father, Joon-Ho confirmed. Which tells me something important, Bose. He's afraid. Men like him don't waste resources fabricating documents this elaborate unless they genuinely believe you're close to remembering something that could destroy them. Bose looked up at him, and for the first time since the documents arrived, real fear flickered behind her eyes. Not fear of him, but fear of what was clearly still coming. What do they think I remember? She asked. I don't know yet, Joon-Ho admitted. But I think we need to find out, before they decide it's safer to silence you the same way they silenced your father. The breakthrough, when it finally came, arrived not through investigation but through an object Joon-Ho had kept safe for 12 years without fully understanding why. He brought the old chessboard to her again, 3 nights later, setting it carefully on the small table between them in the quiet of the estate's private library. Your father used to say this board held more secrets than his entire company, Joon-Ho said. I never understood what he meant until recently. Bose ran her fingers across the worn wooden squares, the same flicker of recognition stirring faintly in her chest that she'd felt the first time he'd shown her this board. Play with me, Joon-Ho said quietly. The way you used to. Not because I think it will magically restore your memory, but because your father once told me that some things live in the body even after the mind forgets them. They played in silence for nearly 20 minutes, Bose's moves hesitant at first, then growing steadily more confident, muscle memory guiding her fingers toward strategies her conscious mind couldn't consciously recall. And then, as she reached for a particular pawn to execute a particular opening her father had once taught her, something inside her finally broke loose. She gasped, her hand freezing over the board, her vision swimming with a memory so vivid it felt like drowning. Her father, years younger, sitting across from her on a similar board, his voice low and urgent. If anything ever happens to me, Bose, remember this sequence. Knight to f3. Bishop to c4. Queen's gambit declined. It's not just a game. It's where I hid everything. Promise me you'll remember. I remember, Bose whispered, tears spilling down her face before she even registered she was crying. He told me. Before he died, he told me where he hid evidence against Choi Sung-tae. He hid it inside a chess sequence. A specific opening. I can see it. I can see the exact moves. Joon-Ho leaned forward, his entire body taut with 12 years of hope finally finding solid ground beneath it. Where, Bose? Where did he hide it? A vault, Bose said, her voice shaking with the effort of pulling the memory fully into the light. Not here. Not in Korea. In Lagos. Beneath the original Adeyemi Global Resources building. He told me the sequence would unlock it. Knight, bishop, queen's gambit declined. It's not just chess notation. It's a code. A literal vault combination disguised as a chess opening. Joon-Ho sat back slowly, the weight of the revelation settling over both of them like the first real breath of air after years spent underwater. Then we go to Lagos, he said quietly. And we finish what your father started. What followed was not subtle, and it was not slow. Within a week, Joon-Ho's organization, working alongside investigators Bose's father had once trusted, men who had been waiting 12 patient years for exactly this evidence, extracted documents from that hidden vault that confirmed everything the falsified papers had tried to bury. Financial records connecting Choi Sung-tae to an international laundering network spanning 3 continents. Recorded conversations implicating him directly in the order that led to Emmanuel Adeyemi's death. Evidence so thorough, so meticulously preserved, that no fabricated counter-document could ever hope to outweigh it. The collapse, when it finally came, was swift and absolute. Bank accounts frozen across 4 countries. Political allies who had spent years protecting Sung-tae's interests suddenly and publicly distancing themselves. Executives who had built careers on his patronage scrambling to claim ignorance. Within days, the empire that had once seemed untouchable began crumbling in full public view, exposed by exactly the kind of undeniable proof Joon-Ho had spent 12 years failing to find on his own. Min-suk, watching his father's world disintegrate from the windows of an apartment that would soon no longer belong to him, understood with sudden, sickening clarity that he had spent his final days of power obsessing over a maid who had turned out to be the very instrument of his family's destruction. But Choi Sung-tae himself was nowhere to be found. In the chaos of accounts freezing and warrants issuing, the man at the center of it all had vanished entirely. No trace at his penthouse, no trace at any of his known properties, no trace even in the surveillance footage that should have captured his departure. He simply wasn't there anymore, as though he had anticipated this exact collapse and prepared an exit no one, not even Kang Joon-Ho's extensive network, had managed to map. We'll find him, Joon-Ho told Bose, standing together in the garden where this entire chapter of their lives had truly begun. A man like that doesn't disappear forever. Not when this much of the world is now looking for him. And if he comes back, Bose said quietly, looking for revenge? Joon-Ho was quiet for a long moment, his eyes scanning the horizon as though he could already feel something out there, patient and furious, biding its time. Then we'll be ready, he said. Together, this time. Not the way it happened to your father, alone and unprotected. This time, whatever comes back, it comes back to find both of us waiting. Months later, Bose stood on a tarmac in Lagos, the African sun warm against skin that had spent 18 months hiding from sunlight in a country thousands of miles from home. She had reclaimed control of Adeyemi Global Resources, not out of hunger for power, but out of a quiet, fierce determination to finish rebuilding everything her father had spent his life creating, this time on a foundation no corruption could quietly poison again. She could have stayed in Africa. Everyone expected her to. The board of her own company assumed it. The journalists covering her dramatic return assumed it. Instead, she returned to Korea. Joon-Ho was waiting for her at the airport, exactly as he'd promised, with no bodyguards trailing him, no syndicate members flanking his sides. Just him, standing alone in the arrivals hall like the boy he must have once been, waiting outside a loading dock for a kindness he never expected to receive twice in one lifetime. Bose walked toward him slowly, and when she finally stopped in front of him, she extended her pinky finger between them, the same small, fierce gesture a 9-year-old girl had once used to seal a promise she hadn't understood would take 12 years to keep. "A promise is a promise," she said softly. Joon-Ho laughed, a real laugh this time, unguarded, the kind he hadn't allowed himself in over a decade, and linked his finger with hers. "I told your father I'd find you," he said. "I never told him what I'd do once I actually had." "What will you do?" Bose asked, something warm and unguarded finally settling in her own chest after years of carrying fear she hadn't even fully understood. "Whatever it takes," Joon-Ho said quietly, "to make sure no one ever takes you from me again." They walked out of that airport together, not because fate had forced their paths to collide, but because two people who had spent 12 years separated by tragedy had finally, deliberately, chosen the same future. But far across the ocean, in a city Bose had never visited and Joon-Ho had not yet thought to search, a man with no remaining empire and nothing left to lose sat in the shadows of a rented apartment, watching news coverage of the daughter who had unknowingly destroyed everything he'd built. Choi Sung-tae set down his phone, a single new message glowing on the screen from a number even his most loyal remaining contact didn't recognize. The girl remembers everything now. It's time to finish what should have ended 12 years ago. He smiled, slow and cold, and made a single call. "Tell our friend in Busan," he said quietly, "that I'm coming home soon. And this time, I won't be the one who disappears." And that's where we leave Bose and Joon-Ho for now, together finally, but with a storm still gathering somewhere just out of sight. Thank you so much for staying with this story all the way to the end. If any part of it moved you, made you tense up, or made you root for these two, I'd really love to hear about it. Drop a comment below telling me which moment hit you hardest, because I genuinely read every single one. I'm also always curious where this story found you, so let me know what city or country you're watching from today. Stay safe out there, stay blessed, and I'll see you in the next one.